My daughter's shocking text. We're done with you. Don't ever find us again. My life changed forever. My name is Naomi Ruth Calloway. I am 67 years old. And on the morning of my birthday, the only person I had left in this world sent me a text message that stopped my heart. I was standing in my kitchen in my yellow house robe, the one with the fraying hem I kept meaning to throw away, but never did, holding a cup of coffee that was still too hot to drink. The steam was rising up and curling in the morning light coming through the window, and I was watching it drift, thinking about how the day felt soft and quiet and good. My garden was blooming outside. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere far away. The clock on the wall said 7:14 in the morning. It was the kind of peaceful that makes you breathe slowly and think, yes, this is enough. This life is enough. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up without thinking. I thought it might be my friend Deborah, who sometimes sent me long good morning messages full of Bible verses and prayer requests. I smiled before I even looked at the screen. But it wasn't Deborah. It was my daughter. My Esther. My only child. The little girl I had raised alone after her father walked out when she was 4 years old. The child I had worked double shifts at the hospital for, ironing her school uniforms at midnight and packing her lunch every single morning for 13 years straight. The same Esther who once drew me a crayon picture of us holding hands under a rainbow and told me I was the best mama in the whole entire universe. The text said this: Mom, we have been talking about this for a long time. You are toxic. You are selfish. You have destroyed this family with your manipulation and control. Caleb and I are done. We are leaving and we are not telling you where we are going. Do not call. Do not come looking. Do not contact us ever again. We are done with you. Don't ever find us again. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs just stopped working. The coffee cup was still in my hand. I didn't even feel it tipping. The coffee spilled across the tile and spread warm and brown toward my bare feet, and I just sat there, reading those words a third time, a fourth time, searching for something I had missed, some part of the sentence where it turned around and made sense, where it revealed itself as a joke or a misunderstanding or a message meant for someone else. There was nothing like that, just those words, cold and final and clean as a blade. Don't ever find us again. And if you are watching this right now, whether you are in Lagos or London or somewhere in the middle of the night you can't sleep, drop your city in the comments right now. Because I need you to stay with me until the very end. Because what I am about to tell you is not just my story. It is a story about love and sacrifice, and a betrayal so deep it came from a place I never thought to protect. And when you find out who was really behind that text message, you are going to feel your stomach drop. Because it was not Esther. Not really. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Let me take you all the way back to where this story truly begins, so that when we get to the part that broke me, you will feel exactly what I felt. Every single piece of it. I had Esther when I was 29 years old. Her father's name was Marcus, and I loved that man the way young women love men. They should have studied more carefully before trusting. He was tall and charming, and he quoted scripture at the dinner table and cried at our wedding like he meant every word of his vows. And maybe he did in that moment. Maybe he did. But 4 years later, when Esther was still small enough to fall asleep in my arms and still young enough to believe that everything her mama told her was true, Marcus packed 2 bags on a Tuesday evening while I was at work and left a note on the kitchen counter that said he was sorry, but he had found something he couldn't walk away from. He didn't say what it was. I never asked. I picked up Esther from my neighbor's house that night, carried her home, put her in her pajamas, and sang her to sleep. Then I sat in the bathroom with the water running so she couldn't hear me, and I cried until there was nothing left. And then I washed my face. And the next morning, I got up and made her breakfast. That was the choice I made. I chose Esther. I chose to pour every single thing that had been meant for a marriage, all that love and energy and devotion, into raising my daughter. She was my whole world. She knew it and I knew it, and I thought that was a beautiful thing. I did not know back then that a mother's total love could one day be used against her as a weapon. Esther grew up strong. She was the kind of girl who made teachers write extra notes home about her character. She sang in the church choir from the age of 8. She graduated top of her class. When she was 24, she met a young man named Caleb, a quiet, serious man who worked in construction and read his Bible every morning and called me ma'am the first time we met. I liked him. I thanked God for him. I thought finally, my daughter has found someone steady. Someone good. The wedding was small. Just close family and a few friends in the church hall. I made the decorations myself. I stayed up 3 nights in a row cutting ribbon and folding napkins and getting every detail right because I wanted Esther's wedding to be perfect even if I couldn't afford to make it grand. When she walked down that aisle in the simple white dress we found together at a second-hand store that she made look like it cost $1,000, I cried so hard the woman sitting next to me put her arm around me. For the first 2 years, everything was fine. Esther and Caleb rented a small apartment 20 minutes from my house. I visited on Sundays. We had dinner together most weekends. Sometimes Caleb would ask me to pray before meals, and I would take his hand and Esther's hand and bow my head and mean every word. Then Caleb's sister arrived. Her name was Miriam, and from the moment Miriam walked through that apartment door with her designer suitcase and her practiced smile and her big, careful eyes that took in everything in the room and gave nothing back, something in my stomach shifted in a way I could not explain. I told myself I was being foolish. I told myself she was family and family deserved grace. I told myself that the small cold feeling when she hugged me hello was just my imagination working too hard. I told myself a lot of things in those early months. Miriam had moved to the city for work, she said. She needed somewhere to stay for just a little while, she said. She would be out of their hair before they knew it, she said. That was 18 months before the text message. 18 months during which I watched my daughter slowly, quietly, almost invisibly begin to change. It started small. The Sunday dinners became every other Sunday. Then once a month. Esther stopped calling in the evenings the way she used to, those long, comfortable calls where we talked about nothing and everything until one of us fell asleep. When I called her, sometimes she answered and sometimes she didn't, and when she didn't, the callback came hours later with a voice that sounded a little distant, a little careful, like she was choosing her words from a list someone else had written. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I am her mother. But every time I tried to bring it up, Esther would say I was being sensitive. She was just busy. She was just tired. She and Caleb were building their life, and it was a lot to manage. I needed to give her space. I needed to stop making everything about me. That last part. Stop making everything about me. I had never heard my daughter speak to me like that before. It landed like a small slap. I apologized immediately. I drove home replaying the conversation and wondering what I had done, where I had gone wrong, how I could be better. I didn't know, not yet, that those words didn't come from Esther. They came from Miriam. 3 weeks before my birthday, I stopped by the apartment unannounced. I know that sounds like the kind of thing a controlling mother would do. But I had been trying to reach Esther for 9 days, and her phone kept going to voicemail, and I had a pot of her favorite pepper soup, and I was worried. Any mother would have been worried. I knocked on the door. Caleb answered. His face did something strange when he saw me, a flicker of something I couldn't name, surprise maybe, or guilt, or both. He stepped outside and pulled the door halfway closed behind him instead of inviting me in. We stood on the narrow landing, and he told me Esther wasn't feeling well. He said she needed rest. He said it might be better if I called ahead next time. Called ahead. To visit my own daughter. I handed him the soup. I smiled. I said of course, I was sorry to bother them. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. He took the soup. He said she was fine. He went back inside. As the door closed, I heard voices inside the apartment. 2 women's voices. And one of them was laughing. I stood on that landing for a long moment. Then I walked back to my car. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, and I had been too afraid of being labeled controlling. Too afraid of being the difficult mother-in-law. Too afraid of losing my daughter's approval to say so plainly. I drove home in silence. That night I opened my Bible to the book of Ruth and read the part where Ruth says to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die." And I wept. Because that was what I had believed about Esther and me. That we were that kind of mother and daughter. That our bond was that kind of bond. 3 weeks later. My birthday morning. The yellow robe. The coffee. the steam curling in the light. The text, "Don't ever find us again." I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time. Long enough for the spilled coffee to go cold. Long enough for the morning to shift and the neighbor's dog to stop barking. Long enough for me to understand that something had been done to my daughter, something quiet and patient and very deliberate, and that the woman behind it had been living in her home, eating at her table, and smiling at me every time we met. I just didn't have proof yet. But here is what I want you to know, what I need you to understand before we go any further. I did not cry that whole day. Not once. I got up off that kitchen floor, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and began to think. Carefully, quietly, the way a woman thinks when she has spent 40 years surviving things that should have broken her and hasn't broken yet. Because I was not just Esther's mother. I was Naomi Ruth Calloway. And somewhere in this story, there was a truth that hadn't come to the surface yet. And I was going to find it, even if it cost me everything. I want to tell you that I handled the days after that text message with grace and dignity. I want to tell you I prayed, got up, and moved forward like the strong woman I believed myself to be. But that would be a lie. And this story deserves the truth. The first 3 days after that birthday morning, I did not leave my house. I did not open the curtains. I ate half a piece of bread on the first day and nothing on the second. I sat in my living room in that same yellow robe with my phone in my lap, reading that text message over and over the way you press your tongue against a broken tooth, knowing it will hurt, doing it anyway. My friend Deborah called twice. My church pastor called once. I let every call go to voicemail because I did not have the strength to speak without falling apart, and falling apart in front of people felt like one more thing I could not survive right now. On the third night, I did something I am not proud of. I called Esther's number. I knew she had said not to call. I knew she had said do not contact us. But I am her mother, and there is a point where a mother stops being rational and starts being just a mother, raw and desperate and reaching. The phone rang 4 times. I held my breath on every single ring. I was already forming the words in my head, already deciding how gentle I would sound, how careful, how I would not cry, how I would simply say, "Baby, talk to me, just talk to me." It went to voicemail, but it was not Esther's voicemail. The number had been disconnected and reassigned. A man's voice I had never heard said the number was no longer in service. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it. She had changed her number. My daughter had changed her number. She had not just sent a text and gone quiet. She had deliberately, carefully, completely cut the wire between us. That was the moment the grief turned into something else. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter and more dangerous than anger. Something that felt like clarity. I got up. I showered for the first time in 3 days. I made a real meal. I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and a pen, and I wrote one question at the top of the page. What changed the moment Miriam arrived? Then I started writing. I wrote for 2 hours. Every small thing I had noticed and dismissed over 18 months. Every strange moment I had explained away. Every time Esther had used a phrase or an expression that didn't sound like her. I wrote it all down in my careful nurse's handwriting, the same way I used to document patient charts at the hospital, systematic, factual, emotionless on the outside. When I was done, I had 3 pages. And when I read them back, a pattern emerged so clear and so cold that I had to put the pen down and press both hands flat on the table to steady myself. Every single shift in Esther had begun in the 3 months after Miriam moved in. Every single one. Now let me tell you about Miriam, because I need you to understand who this woman really was. Not who she presented herself to be. Who she actually was. Miriam Asante was 31 years old. Caleb's younger sister by 4 years. She was beautiful in the kind of way that made people trust her immediately. Soft features, warm smile, always dressed modestly. Always with a scripture ready on her lips. She worked in human resources at a company downtown, which meant she spent her professional life understanding how people thought and what made them feel safe and what made them feel threatened. She knew how to read a room. She knew how to make herself necessary. She knew how to plant a seed in someone's mind so carefully that by the time the seed grew into a belief, the person believed they had always thought that way themselves. I know all of this now. I did not know it then. What I knew then was that every time I visited the apartment after Miriam arrived, something felt slightly off in the way Esther talked to me. A little more guarded, a little more formal, like she was remembering things she had been told to remember. Like someone had given her a quiet list of my faults, and she was trying to see me through that list instead of through her own eyes. I thought about a Sunday dinner about 8 months back. Esther had made jollof rice and fried plantain, and we were all at the table, me and Esther and Caleb and Miriam. And I made a small comment. I said the rice needed just a little more seasoning. I said it gently, the way I always said it, the way Esther and I had always spoken to each other in the kitchen with no filters and no offense, because we were mother and daughter, and food was our love language and honesty was part of that love. Esther had gone quiet. Miriam had looked up from her plate slowly and said nothing. Just looked at me. Then looked at Esther. Then back down at her food. That was all. No words. Just that look. 3 seconds of careful, loaded silence. And I watched something flicker across Esther's face. Something uncomfortable. Something like embarrassment. She apologized for the rice. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. The moment passed. We finished dinner. But the temperature in that room had changed, and I felt it, and I did not know why. I know why now. That look Miriam gave was not nothing. That look was a full conversation conducted without a single word. That look said, "Do you see? Do you see what she does to you? Do you see how she criticizes you even here, even at your own table?" It took 3 seconds, and it cost Miriam nothing, and it planted something in Esther that would grow quietly for the next 8 months until it became a text message on a birthday morning that ended with "Don't ever find us again." I am telling you this slowly because I need you to feel how subtle it was. How patient. Because when we imagine betrayal, we imagine screaming and accusations and dramatic moments. We imagine someone getting caught red-handed doing something obviously terrible. We do not imagine the soft kind. The quiet kind. The kind that happens over shared dinners and gentle looks and careful words dropped like seeds into the soil of a young woman's mind by someone who lived in her home and whispered in the evenings when the lights were low. That is the kind that destroys families without leaving fingerprints. On the 4th day after the text, I called my pastor. His name was Elijah, a tall, quiet man in his 60s who had known me for 20 years and who had the gift of listening without rushing to fill the silence. I did not tell him everything. I told him enough. I told him my daughter had cut contact, and I believed something had happened that I didn't fully understand yet. He listened. He said, "Naomi, sometimes the people we love get lost inside someone else's version of who we are." He said, "Your job is not to chase. Your job is to find the truth, and let the truth do what truth does." I held on to that. Then I did something that surprised even me. I called Caleb's mother. Her name was Abigail. She lived 2 hours away in a small town called Greenfield, a retired schoolteacher who grew tomatoes in her back garden and went to early morning mass every single day without fail. Caleb was her firstborn and Miriam was her youngest, and I had met Abigail exactly 3 times, at the engagement dinner, at the wedding, and once at Christmas 2 years ago. We were not close, but we were both mothers, and right now that felt like enough common ground. She answered on the 2nd ring. When I told her who I was, there was a pause. Not an awkward one. More like the pause of a woman choosing her words very carefully. She said, "Naomi, I was wondering when you would call." My hand tightened on the phone. I said, "Abigail, I need to ask you something about Miriam. And I need you to be honest with me, even if it is uncomfortable." There was another pause. Longer this time. Then she said quietly, "What do you want to know?" I said, "Is there anything about your daughter I should know? Anything about how she operates in other people's homes?" The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Abigail said something that turned my blood to ice. She said, "Miriam has done this before." I sat down very slowly into my kitchen chair. "Done what before?" I said. My voice was steady. My hands were not. Abigail exhaled. She said that 2 years before Caleb's marriage, Miriam had lived with their cousin Samuel and his wife Leah for 8 months. She said that by the time Miriam moved out, Leah was barely speaking to her own mother. She said the 2 of them had been close their whole lives, and within 1 year of Miriam's stay, Leah believed her mother was toxic, controlling, manipulative, a threat to her marriage. She said Leah had cut her mother off completely. She said it had taken 3 years and a near divorce for the truth to come out. She said when it finally did, Leah discovered that Miriam had been having small private conversations with her. Just the two of them, always friendly, always gentle, always framed as concern. That Miriam had been slowly, methodically repainting every memory Leah had of her mother in darker colors. Taking neutral stories and adding shadows to them. Taking innocent moments and reframing them as patterns of abuse. She said Leah's mother had died before they fully reconciled. The room went completely quiet around me. I could hear my own heartbeat. I said, Abigail, why did you never say anything to Caleb before the marriage? She said, I tried. She said she had sat Caleb down before the wedding and told him to watch his sister carefully. She said Caleb had loved Miriam his whole life the way older brothers love younger sisters they have always protected, which meant he had a blind spot the size of a house when it came to her. She said he had told his mother she was imagining things. That Miriam had changed. That she was mature now and he trusted her. She said, I pray every day that my son is not losing his wife the same way Samuel almost lost his. Then she said the thing that made me grip the phone with both hands. She said, Naomi, I think Miriam wants Caleb for herself. Not the way you are thinking. Not like that. But she has never been able to share him. Not with anyone. Every woman Caleb has ever loved, Miriam has found a way to make him question. Esther lasted longer than the others because Esther is strong. But something must have finally cracked. I said it cracked 3 weeks ago. Abigail said, Lord have mercy. I said, I need your help. She said, tell me what you need. And right there, sitting at my kitchen table with my notepad in front of me and 3 pages of quiet evidence and a cold cup of coffee at my elbow, something shifted inside me. The grief was still there. The pain was still there. Missing Esther was a physical thing, a hollow ache in my chest that flared every time I passed her childhood photos in the hallway. But underneath the grief, something steadier was waking up. Because here is what I knew now. My daughter had not turned against me. My daughter had been turned. There is a world of difference between those two things, and that difference was the only thing keeping me breathing. Esther was not gone. She was lost. She was standing inside a version of me that Miriam had built piece by piece over 18 months. A version made of half-truths and strategic silences and well-placed looks over dinner tables. She was living inside a lie that felt like the truth because she had been given no reason to question it. And I was going to dismantle that lie. Brick by brick, if I had to. I opened a fresh page on my notepad. At the top I wrote one name. Miriam Asante. Then I wrote one word underneath it. Evidence. I did not know yet what I was going to find. I did not know that within the next 10 days, something would come to light that would not just expose Miriam, but would shatter everything Caleb believed about the woman he had spent his whole life protecting. I did not know that the person who would bring me that evidence was the last person on earth I ever expected. But I was about to find out. If this story is gripping you right now, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. I have learned in my 67 years on this earth that the truth is never in a hurry. It does not rush. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with drums and lightning the way we imagine it will when we are waiting for it desperately. The truth moves the way water moves under ice. Quiet, steady, invisible on the surface. And then one morning you step out onto what you thought was solid ground, and everything cracks beneath your feet all at once. That is exactly how it happened. It had been 10 days since I wrote Miriam's name at the top of that notepad page. 10 days of careful, quiet, deliberate work. I had not called Esther again. I had not driven past the apartment. I had not done a single thing that could be labeled desperate or unstable or controlling, because I understood now that every move I made had to be clean, had to be beyond question. Because the story Miriam had written about me was the story of a woman who could not control herself, who invaded boundaries, who made everything about her feelings. And I refused to give that story one single piece of evidence to stand on. Instead, I had been listening, watching, gathering. Abigail had been calling me every 2 days from Greenfield. She had started quietly talking to Caleb on the phone, nothing confrontational, just a mother talking to her son the way mothers do, asking careful questions, listening to the spaces between his answers. She told me that Caleb sounded tired. She told me that when she mentioned my name gently in conversation, Caleb had gone quiet in a way that told her he was repeating things he had been told rather than things he actually believed. She said he sounded like a man carrying a version of the truth that was too heavy, but had been told it was the only version that existed. She said, "Naomi, my son is not a bad man. He is a man who loves his sister and has been used because of that love." I said, "I know, Abigail. I know. My pastor Elijah had connected me with a woman in our congregation named Judith who worked as a family counselor. I had 2 sessions with Judith in those 10 days, not because I was falling apart, but because I needed someone trained in these patterns to confirm what I was seeing. When I laid out everything on the table, every observation, every timeline, every shift in Esther's behavior mapped against Miriam's arrival, Judith sat across from me with her reading glasses on and went through my notes slowly and carefully. When she looked up, her face was very serious. She said, "Naomi, what you are describing has a name. It is called coercive relational manipulation." She said it was more common than people realized and far more damaging than people understood because it left no visible marks. She said the target, in this case Esther, was never forced into anything. She was guided, slowly, warmly, with great patience, until she arrived at conclusions that felt entirely her own but had been planted by someone else from the very beginning. She said, "The person doing this is usually someone who feels deeply threatened by the primary bond they are disrupting." I said, "Threatened by what exactly?" She said, "By love. By the kind of love they don't have access to and don't know how to earn honestly. So they dismantle it instead." I drove home from that session and sat in my car in my own driveway for a long time. I thought about Miriam growing up in Caleb's shadow, the youngest child, the one who watched her older brother be adored, the one who had grown up maybe feeling like love was something you competed for rather than something that was freely given. I did not feel sorry for her, but I understood her, and understanding her made me more dangerous to her than anger ever could have. Because anger makes you loud. Understanding makes you precise. Now let me tell you about the person who brought me the evidence I needed. Because this is the part of the story where everything tilts on its axis and the ground shifts under your feet. Her name was Selah. Selah was 24 years old, a small, quiet young woman with natural hair and paint-stained fingers who worked as a graphic designer from her apartment. She had been Esther's closest friend since secondary school. They had grown up 3 houses apart, shared a desk in Form 3, been in each other's corner through every heartbreak and celebration and ordinary Tuesday since they were 14 years old. Selah had called me 6 days after the text message. She called me crying. She said, "Auntie Naomi, I don't know what is happening, but something is very wrong." I said, "Come to the house, baby. Come and talk to me." She came the next morning with red eyes and a phone in her hand and sat at my kitchen table with her knees pulled up to her chest like she was 10 years old again. She said Esther had cut her off too. Same week as me. Different message, but the same energy, cold and final, and using words that didn't sound like Esther. She said she had been trying to understand it for days. She said something kept bothering her, something specific, something she had seen and not known what to do with. I said, "Tell me." She put her phone on the table and slid it toward me. On the screen was a screenshot of a conversation. A WhatsApp exchange between Esther and Miriam dated 4 months ago. Selah explained that Esther had accidentally added her to a group chat and then quickly removed her, but not before Selah's phone had loaded a portion of the conversation history. She had screenshotted it without fully understanding why at the time, some instinct telling her to keep it, and then pushed it to the back of her mind because she hadn't wanted to believe what she was looking at. I picked up the phone. I read the conversation. I am going to tell you what was in it because you need to know. You need to feel the specific coldness of what Miriam had been doing in the privacy of those messages while she sat at my daughter's table and smiled at me across the rice and plantain. The exchange started with Esther saying something warm and ordinary about a Sunday dinner at my house. She said it was a good evening. She said she loved how her mother always made her feel at home. Miriam's response came 4 minutes later. She said, "I'm glad you had a nice time, Esther. I just worry about you sometimes. I see how tense you get before you go there. Your whole body changes. You don't notice it, but I do." Esther had replied with a question mark and a laughing emoji. She said, "What are you talking about? I was fine." Miriam said, "Of course you say that. You've been trained to normalize it." That's what happens when someone has been controlling you since childhood. You stop being able to see it. I had to put the phone down. I pressed both hands flat on the table. Selah was watching me with wide, careful eyes. I took one breath. Then I picked the phone back up and kept reading. The conversation went on for 47 more messages. 47 messages in which Miriam took every ordinary moment from Esther's childhood and painted it black. The times I had been strict became evidence of control. The times I had been protective became evidence of manipulation. The times I had pushed Esther to work hard became evidence of emotional pressure. The times I had cried when Esther left for university became evidence of guilt tripping. Every act of motherhood I had ever performed, including the sacrifices and the double shifts and the midnight ironing and the birthday cakes made from scratch when money was tight, was reframed in those 47 messages as the calculated behavior of a woman who needed to own her daughter. And the most devastating part was not what Miriam said. It was how she said it. She never raised her voice in those messages. She never made accusations that sounded like accusations. She framed everything as concern, as love, as, I just want you to be free, Esther. I just want you to see yourself clearly. I just want you to have the life you deserve. She was warm and gentle and sisterly and patient, and she was poisoning my daughter's memory of me one message at a time, and Esther, who trusted her, who lived with her, who had been hearing this version of her mother drip-fed into her ear for 18 months, had slowly, painfully, genuinely begun to believe it. My daughter had not turned against me. She had been convinced. There is something uniquely devastating about that distinction that I cannot fully put into words. Anger you can fight. Distance you can cross. But when someone you love looks at you through eyes that have been taught to see you as the enemy, when the very memories that were supposed to be the foundation of your bond have been corrupted and repainted, you are not fighting a person anymore. You are fighting a version of yourself that was built without your knowledge in your own absence. I handed the phone back to Selah. My face was calm. My chest was a different matter entirely. I said, Selah, I need you to send me those screenshots right now. She said, Ani, what are you going to do? I said, I am going to tell the truth. But I am going to do it properly. She sent the screenshots. I forwarded them immediately to James Mitchell, the attorney I had consulted earlier that week on Abigail's recommendation. Not because I wanted to sue anyone, but because I needed those screenshots preserved and authenticated by someone outside the family before anything happened to them. James replied within the hour and confirmed receipt. Then I sat down and wrote 2 letters by hand. The first was to Esther. Not a long letter. Not an emotional letter full of accusations and defenses. A short, simple, measured letter that said only this. My darling, I know you believe what you have been told. I know it feels true to you. I am not asking you to trust me right now. I am only asking you to look at what I am going to show you and decide for yourself what is real. I love you. I have always loved you. That love does not need you to believe it in order to keep being true. Your mama. I folded it and sealed it. The second letter was to Caleb. I told him I needed to meet with him alone, without Esther and without Miriam. I told him I had information about his sister that directly affected his marriage, and that he deserved to hear it before it destroyed everything he had built. I told him I was not his enemy. I told him I was a mother trying to save her daughter, and that I believed he was a good man who had been placed in the middle of something he did not fully understand. I sealed that one too. I addressed both envelopes by hand and asked Abigail to deliver them personally. She drove the 2 hours from Greenfield without hesitation. She called me when she arrived at the apartment building, and I sat by my phone with my heart in my throat while she slipped both envelopes under the door. Then I waited. 2 days passed. Then 3. I went back to walking in the mornings. I went back to my garden. I replanted the roses along the left fence that had been struggling all season. I cooked real meals. I called Deborah and let her pray for me over the phone for 20 minutes, which was exactly what I needed. I did not look at my phone every 5 minutes. I put it on the kitchen counter and let it be a phone instead of a lifeline. On the 4th day, at 9:47 in the evening, my phone rang. The number on the screen was one I did not recognize. I answered anyway. There was silence for a moment. Then a voice. Low and uncertain and thick with something that sounded like a man who had been crying and was trying very hard not to still be crying. It was Caleb. He said, Mama Naomi. He had never called me that before. That was what Esther called me. Mama Naomi. And hearing it come from him, in that broken, careful voice, something in my chest split open quietly. I said, Caleb. I am here. He said, I read your letter. And then he said, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Something I found on Miriam's laptop 3 weeks before you got that text message. Something I did not know what to do with. I closed my eyes. He said, I think I made a terrible mistake. The room was completely still around me. My garden was dark outside the window. The grandfather clock in the hallway was ticking. And I understood in that moment that everything was about to come to the surface. Everything Miriam had buried. Everything she had built her careful architecture of lies to protect. It was coming up. All of it. Caleb took a shaking breath on the other end of the phone and began to talk. And what he told me in the next 20 minutes was so much worse than anything I had imagined that I had to grip the edge of the kitchen table with my free hand just to stay in my seat. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth. I need you to understand something before I tell you what Caleb said. I need you to understand that I have buried a husband. I have worked night shifts with swollen feet and a broken heart and a smile on my face for patients who needed me. I have sat in empty apartments after my daughter moved out and learned how to be alone without being destroyed by it. I have survived things that did not announce themselves as survivable in the moment they were happening. I say all of that because I want you to know that I am not a fragile woman. But what Caleb told me that night on the phone, gripping my kitchen table in the dark, shook me in a place I did not know could still be reached. He said that 3 weeks before I received that text message, he had been working late at the kitchen table on a project when Miriam's laptop, which she had left open on the couch, had pinged with a notification. He said he glanced over without thinking, the way you do when a screen lights up in a quiet room. He said what he saw on that screen made him pick the laptop up and sit down very slowly on the couch and read for the next 40 minutes without moving. What he had found was a folder. Not hidden, not encrypted. Sitting right there in her documents, labeled with a name so ordinary it would never raise suspicion. He said the folder was titled Family Notes. He said inside were documents. Typed, organized, dated. He said there were conversation logs, not screenshots of real conversations, but fabricated ones. Constructed exchanges written to look like messages between me and other people. Messages in which I said terrible things about Esther, about Caleb, about their marriage. Messages designed to look like evidence of a mother who had been privately undermining her daughter's life for years. He said there were also notes. Detailed notes on Esther. Observations about her moods, her insecurities, her fears, her soft spots. A map of everything that made his wife vulnerable, written in Miriam's careful hand, with notations beside each point about how to use it. He said there was a document titled Progress with dates going back 14 months. 14 months of documented, methodical, strategic work to separate his wife from her mother. I could not speak for a long moment. Caleb's voice on the phone was the voice of a man standing in the rubble of something he had built with his own hands and only just understood had been undermined from the foundation. He said he had closed the laptop and put it back exactly where Miriam had left it. He said he had gone to the bathroom and run the cold tap and stood over the sink for a long time. He said he had not known what to do with what he had seen because it meant that everything he had believed about his sister, everything he had defended and protected and chosen over the warnings of people who loved him, had been a performance. He said, Mama Naomi, I confronted her that same night. I showed her what I found. I asked her to explain it to me. I asked her to give me one reason, one honest reason, for what I was looking at. I said, what did she say? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said she cried. She said she was doing it for me. She said Esther was not good enough for me, and that you had raised her to be weak and dependent, and that she was protecting me from a marriage that would destroy my future. She said everything she had done was out of love. He stopped. I could hear him breathing. He said, and then she said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She said, Caleb, I am the only one who has ever truly loved you. Everyone else will leave. I am the only one who stays. The room around me went absolutely still. There it was. Right there in one sentence was the entire architecture of everything Miriam had built. Not strategy. Not cruelty for the sake of cruelty. something sadder and more frightening than either of those things. A woman who had grown up believing love was a competition with a single winner. A woman who had watched her brother love other people and felt it as a personal theft. A woman who had spent years carefully, systematically dismantling every relationship that threatened her place at the center of his life, and who had gotten so skilled at it, so practiced, so frighteningly precise, that she had nearly destroyed a marriage and a mother and a daughter and a family without leaving a single visible mark. She had done it out of love. That was the most devastating part. Not malice. Love. The broken, consuming, suffocating kind that never learned the difference between holding on and holding captive. I said, "Caleb, where is Miriam now?" He said she had left the apartment the morning after the confrontation. He said she had gone to stay with a friend, and he had not spoken to her since. He said Esther did not know any of this yet. He said he had been trying to figure out how to tell his wife that the woman she had trusted, the woman she had allowed to reshape her entire understanding of her own mother, had been running a deliberate campaign against her family from inside their home. He said, "I don't know how to tell her. I don't know how she is going to survive knowing this." I said, "Caleb, you let me worry about Esther. You just need to be her husband. Be steady. Be honest. Don't protect her from the truth because you think she is too fragile for it. She is not fragile. She is my daughter." He made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "I am coming over tomorrow morning. Will you be there?" He said, "Yes. And Mama Naomi, I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry for what I let happen in my own house. For not seeing it sooner. For not protecting you both the way I should have." I said, "Caleb, you were deceived by someone you loved. That is not weakness. That is what happens to good people when they trust without suspicion. You are not the villain in this story. You hear me?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." His voice was very quiet. I said good night. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time. Then I did something I had not done since the morning of that text message. I cried. Not the broken, collapsing kind of crying I had done on the kitchen floor with the spilled coffee spreading around my feet. This was different. This was the kind of crying that comes when the worst is over and your body finally gives itself permission to release everything it has been holding in carefully controlled hands for weeks. I cried for Esther, for the version of her mother that had been slowly poisoned inside her mind. I cried for Caleb, for the man who had spent his whole life protecting a sister who had been quietly burning down everything he loved. I cried for Miriam, because somewhere underneath all of that damage was a woman who had never learned that love given freely was the only kind worth having. And I cried for Thomas, my late husband, Esther's father who had left when she was 4 years old and never come back. Because I understood now that the wound his leaving had made in our family had never fully closed, and Miriam had found that wound in the dark and pressed on it with expert fingers. And I wished, not for the first time and not for the last, that he had stayed. I wiped my face. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning I put on my good navy dress and my pearl earrings and I drove to my daughter's apartment. Caleb opened the door. He looked like a man who had not slept, which he probably hadn't. He stepped aside without a word and I walked in. The apartment was quiet. The curtains were half open. Morning light was coming through in long, warm slants across the floor. Esther was sitting on the couch. She was wearing an oversized sweater and her hair was loose and she looked younger than her age, which she always did in the mornings, and she looked up when I walked in and her face did something complicated and painful, and then it just crumpled. She said, "Mama." Not mom. Not mother. Mama. The word she had used when she was small and frightened and needed me, and had not yet learned to be ashamed of needing me. I crossed the room in 4 steps. I sat down beside her and I put my arms around her, and she folded into me the way she used to when she was 7 years old and had a bad dream, completely, without reservation, without the careful guardedness that had been living in her body for 18 months. She said, "Mama, I am so sorry. I believe things. I said things. I sent you that message on your birthday and I said, shh. I said, baby, stop. I said, you do not owe me an apology for being deceived by someone you trusted. That is not your fault. That has never been your fault." She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were swollen. Her face was a mess. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. She said, "How are you not angry with me?" I said, because I am your mother. And because I know who you really are underneath everything that was done to you. And because not once, not for a single day in the weeks since that text message, did I stop believing that my daughter was still in there. Caleb quietly left the room and gave us our space. We sat together on that couch for 2 hours. We talked. We cried. We laughed once, unexpectedly, when Esther recalled something Miriam had told her about me that was so wildly inaccurate that even through the pain of it we could see the absurdity. We held each other's hands the way we used to on long car journeys when she was small and the road was dark, and I told her stories to keep her from being afraid. The road had been very dark for a long time. But we were back. As for Miriam, Caleb eventually had a long and painful conversation with her that I was not part of and did not need to be part of. What happened between a brother and a sister in the aftermath of something like this was their story to navigate, not mine. Abigail told me later that Miriam had agreed to seek professional help, that there had been tears and confessions and a reckoning that had been a long time coming. I did not wish Miriam ill. I genuinely did not. I hoped she found healing. I hoped she found the kind of love that didn't require her to burn other people's love to the ground in order to feel it. But I also made sure that she understood through Caleb, through James Mitchell's carefully worded letter, through the weight of everything that had been documented and preserved and witnessed, that what she had done had a name, and that name had consequences, and that the only reason those consequences were not currently being pursued in a courtroom was because the woman she had underestimated had chosen grace over destruction. I chose grace. Not because I was weak, but because I had spent 67 years learning that the most powerful thing a person can do after surviving something terrible is refuse to let it make them terrible in return. 6 months later, I am sitting on my porch in the evening with a cup of tea, and my garden doing exactly what a garden does in the warm months, blooming extravagantly and without apology. Esther calls me every single day now, not out of obligation, out of the rediscovered joy of a daughter who got her mother back and understands now exactly what that is worth. Last Sunday she came over, and we cooked together in my kitchen for 3 hours and talked about everything and nothing, and at one point she looked at me across the counter with flour on her hands and said, "Mama, I want to be exactly like you when I get older." I said, "Baby, you're already better than me." She threw a dish towel at me. We laughed until the kitchen filled up with it. There are things I know now that I did not know on that birthday morning, when I sat on the kitchen floor with cold coffee spreading toward my bare feet, and the most painful text message I have ever received glowing on my phone screen. I know that love is not always loud. Sometimes it is a father who leaves and a mother who stays and makes breakfast anyway. Sometimes it is a daughter who was lost and a mother who refused to stop believing in her. Sometimes it is an older woman in Greenfield growing tomatoes and driving 2 hours without being asked because she understands that being a mother means sometimes you fight for other people's children too. I know that betrayal rarely looks the way we expect it to. It does not always arrive with a raised voice and an obvious wound. Sometimes it arrives with a warm smile and a gentle look across a dinner table and 47 careful messages designed to make someone you love see you through strangers' eyes. And I know this most deeply, most certainly, most permanently. Never underestimate a quiet woman who has decided to find the truth. She will find it, every single time. This is Naomi Ruth Calloway. Still in my house. Still in my garden. Still standing. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means everything.